sometimes highbrow. Public broadcasting, an American icon.
Welcome, neighbor.
Now it's under fire as elitist, liberal, and a waste of taxpayer money.
Blow me away!
A radical idea by conservatives to take away funding for public broadcasting. Tonight, George Will debates Bill Moyers.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
A couple of times every year, for a few days at a time, although it seems more often and longer, the public television stations here in the Washington area, and probably where you live also, raise money. They do this by holding the programs I want to watch hostage, by putting some of the most well-meaning and boring people in the world on camera and having them threaten to keep talking until we all buy coffee mugs, umbrellas, and tote bags for sums well over their market value. This is what is called a membership drive. And because some of us genuinely love what public television puts on the air, we pay up. But so, through your taxes, do you, even if you never watch public television. And judging by their ratings, a great many of you don't. So some people, most of them conservatives, have begun saying the unthinkable, that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting should start learning to get along on less. Here's more from Nightline correspondent Jackie Judd.
It's almost un-American to suggest, but there are people out there who say it's time for Big Bird and his Sesame Street chums to grow up and enter the real world.
Big Bird ought to be controlled by free market principles. It is making money. It is a money-making proposition. It doesn't need any form of government subsidy.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor.
Public broadcasting just isn't the tranquil world of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or of Carnegie Hall or of Masterpiece Theater these days. It's never faced a more serious threat to its future. Lyndon Johnson recognized the pitfalls when he created public broadcasting 25 years ago.
But in weak or even in irresponsible hands, it could generate controversy without understanding. It could mislead as well as to teach. It could appeal to passions rather than to reason.
This is PBS.
Some argue that day has arrived. The most severe critics say the country doesn't need an expensive public TV system anymore. Others, principally a group of Republican senators, say it needs to be more accountable.
Anger unvented becomes pain, unspoken becomes...
They use shows such as Tongues Untied about gay black men to make their point that public TV is out of control.
Now, a lot of decent Americans called my office and wrote to my office and wrote to me and have grabbed me by the jacket as I went through an airport lobby and said, what the hell is going on when the taxpayers are required to fund such garbage as that?
This is Frontline.
Even more mainstream PBS shows are being criticized following the release of a report from the Center for Media and Public Affairs. It analyzed a year of PBS documentaries and concluded they consistently favored liberal positions.
So they stick a little token program in like William Buckley or John McLaughlin. But those are tokens. They don't stand up against Frontline or Bill Moyers' Journal or What's Wrong with America, which is now on PBS. You know, why not do a little document on what's right with America?
PBS doesn't consider that to be its mandate.
If you're questioning the status quo, if you're looking at things that are going wrong in society, if you're looking at what the problems and the warts and the difficulties are, you could say that has some kind of political bias.
The debate about politics and bias has led to the larger question of whether public TV has outlived its usefulness, whether its funding agency, CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, really needs $1 billion over the next 3 years, especially during a recession.
Hey!
In the dark ages of TV, when CPB was created, there were only 3 television networks. Critics point out it's a different world now.
You've got cable services, you've got direct broadcast satellite, so there's sort of a large smorgasbord to choose from as an audience, and there's no need to have one single channel for educational and cultural programming supported by the government.
So Jarvik and other conservatives say it's time to sell CPB. They believe the quality programs would survive.
I think programs like Sesame Street, programs like McNeil Lehrer will do very well on the private market. But other programs like Tongues Untied wouldn't last a minute if the free market had anything to do with it. There is a supply and demand situation going on here.
Startup money for one of television's most celebrated series came from CPB. And producer Ken Burns says it's precisely that support that gave the Civil War life.
This program would not have been made. No one would have taken the chance to say you can do 11 and a half hours of still photographs about a very moving war. And if they had, it would have been an hour or two. We would have had correspondents and hosts and who knows what sort of devices.
In fact, the 7 Republican senators who held up consideration of the CPB funding bill are not willing to put up the for sale sign. They do, however, want strings attached to any money they appropriate.
We don't suggest we ought to dictate the content, but when they have a controversial program talks about socialized medicine, then there ought to be something to talk about the private sector, another program. So just give us some balance and give us some accountability.
To supporters, that sounds like censorship.
They're going to try to blackmail the country by threatening to hold up the public broadcasting system and destroy the base of funding for public broadcasting unless public broadcasting will bend to their will.
What these legislators in Washington, D.C. fail to recognize is that they don't have the right to take the money of the American taxpayer to play their little games on television.
We'll probably end up doing it.
There has always been tension between the money givers and the program makers. This, however, may well be the year that PBS is reined in, and supporters fear it will only be the start of the chipping away of public broadcasting. This is Jackie Judd for Nightline in Washington.
When we come back, we'll be joined by columnist and ABC News commentator George Will, and by one of the luminaries of public broadcasting, Bill Moyers.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by LensCrafters.
Look at these red marks. These old glasses do nothing but pinch. They're a pain.
You don't have to put up with glasses that don't fit anymore.
Now LensCrafters brings you better fit for greater comfort. LensCrafters glasses fit your snug points with features like new self-adjusting snug fit pads that flex to gently and securely hug your nose.
No more pinching. I never knew glasses could be this comfortable.
LensCrafters, better fit for greater comfort. In about an hour.
The Mitsubishi Diamante LS with TCL traction control, electronically controlled suspension, anti-lock braking. Safety and performance features associated with luxury performance sedans like Lexus and Infiniti. Now seamlessly integrated and refined in this luxury performance sedan, the Diamante LS from Mitsubishi. The word is getting around.
Listen up, there's a whole new kind of Cheerios. Multigrain Cheerios. Corn, rice, wheat, and oats.
All good for one great taste. Multigrain Cheerios.
Corn, rice, wheat, and oats for a harmony of taste.
All good O's in harmony. All good O's for one great taste. Multigrain Cheerios.
A harmony of taste. Imagine this was your flight.
I saw a flash out the window, a big orange ball of fire.
I said to my husband, we're going down.
Prime time on board, Thursday.
Bill Moyers has spent the better part of the last 20 years with public broadcasting and ranks as one of its most distinguished citizens for his work as a producer and host for documentaries and news programs. He joins us from our studios in New York. George Will, syndicated columnist and ABC News commentator, recently used his column to argue against funding public broadcasting, which he labeled an upper middle class entitlement. George Will joins us in our Washington studios. And indeed, Bill, much as perhaps all three of us enjoy the programming on public broadcasting, why should it not compete as all other programming does?
Well, the issue to me is one of choice. Public broadcasting is the only non-commercial source of television in this country. And there is, to me, a philosophical value to having choice available to people who want television and education free of market-driven commercial forces. I recognize there are people on the other side of that issue philosophically, but once it turned out that the Communications Act of 1964 had virtually yielded the public airwaves to corporations to allow markets to decide what would and wouldn't be seen, the President and the Congress decided there really should be a non-commercial alternative. And I still think that that is a very valid position.
George, while that clearly was the way things were 25 years ago at a time when cable television didn't exist and all kinds of other broadcasting outlets did not exist, nevertheless, is it not true that the kind of programming that has been created by PBS simply doesn't exist anywhere else?
I don't think it's nearly as true as it once was. If you look at the Discovery Channel, Arts and Entertainment, CNN, for that matter, to take just three from an array of examples that are part of the explosion of diversity brought to us by the technological change since 1967 when the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was invented, you see that public broadcasting has a much smaller claim to be providing something, A, unique, let alone essential. Let's start with basics. Before government, using its taxation power, spends our money, it ought to have a good reason. Before it spends our money to subsidize something in competition with private interests, it ought to have a very good reason. Whatever you think, Ted, of the original rationale for public television, back in 1967, when for most American households to sit down in front of the television was to choose between ABC, NBC, CBS, and maybe public television, that rationale collapses under the changed technological context in which we live. It's already been mentioned, but also the changed fiscal context. The fact is we're $400 billion in debt this year. There are other interests with claims on the government. Why this one?
Let me just pose to you, George, one other question which you raised in your column, and that is, in effect, you said this is an entitlement for the upper middle class, for the wealthy.
There's no question, Ted, that the audience for public television is intellectually and for that reason often economically upscale. It is a small group of Americans who ought to be able to and should fend for themselves in providing their cultural appetites.
That just isn't true, George, and with all due respect, you know, I admire you very much. In fact, one of the small claims to fame we make at public broadcasting is that we gave you your launch in this medium in 1975, a program I did. I took a leave of absence. They put a program together, and you were one of the correspondents. I remember, in fact...
You deserve to be punished for that one, Moyers.
I remember, in fact, that George's first choice of an interview was with Hugh Hefner at the Playboy Mansion out in Chicago, and I said to one of my colleagues, that fella has a great career in commercial television. But the fact of the matter is that 60% of our audience makes under $40,000 a year. Our audience, it mirrors society as a whole. It is true that the majority of people who contribute in those fund drives that nettle Ted and others are people who have more money, because people who have more money tend to give money. Although that's also true that we get a lot of pledges from lower economic scales. But it just isn't true that this is an elite medium. In fact, so much of what we do is educational value. We go every day, every year, to 64,000 public schools in this country, 27 million kids who have access to non-commercial educational television. That is a myth that has been propagated by the enemies of public broadcasting.
Let me stipulate, Bill, A, that I'm not an enemy of public broadcasting.
I know that, but there are some.
I'm willing to stipulate, in fact, that public television is a net enhancement of American life, and if it could be provided by waving a magic wand, I would say wave away vigorously. However, it must be sustained, not by waving a wand, but by money that is in scarce supply.
But, George, only 17% of public broadcasting's revenues come from the government. In fact, it's the private sector and individuals who are subsidizing a government program here.
Precisely.
A government program that is probably dollar for dollar the best value you can get. I mean, look, George, about $200 billion a year, $200 million a year is spent by the Pentagon on marching bands. Now, I know you're a hawk when it comes to military matters, but Don't you think that that's a little excessive too? That's just a little bit less than what public broadcasting gets every year.
Let me just let that question hang for one breathtaking moment while we take a break, and we'll let George discuss marching bands or anything else he would care to address when we come back in a moment.
How bad are your allergies?
Terrible.
Terrible allergy attack?
I feel like I just want to unscrew my head, take it off.
Suppose I took you Benadryl away.
I'd be home in bed.
Would you try this new allergy medicine?
Does it work the same?
Dristan Allergy has a decongestant, and this Benadryl doesn't. So it relieves nasal congestion and pressure Benadryl can't. Let's try it.
Okay. I feel fantastic.
Why?
I can breathe through my nose. I don't need a tissue anymore.
New Dristan Allergy. Dristan, the face of relief today. Kilimanjaro, 1.8 million years in the making. It's finally ready for the new Jeep.
Ford trucks are #1 for the 6th year in a row, and to say thanks, your Ford dealers are giving you Truck Month. 30 days of the biggest savings of the year on every Ford truck, van, and sport utility in stock. Like the hot new Ford Explorer, the best-selling vehicle in its class. During Truck Month, save over $1,900. Or how about the perfect family vacation vehicle, Ford Aerostar, loaded with all this and Truck Month price less than $13,800. But Truck Month is only during May, so hurry while the selection is still great.
The notorious Ivan Boesky, symbol of Wall Street greed. What was life like with the king of insider trading? His estranged wife tells me on 2020 Friday.
Continuing our discussion now with Bill Moyers and George Will. George, when one considers all the many things upon which money is, in fact, wasted by our government, and Bill Moyers a moment ago was talking about the $200 million spent on marching bands, surely compromise is possible on this issue with regard to some continued funding of public broadcasting.
Well, there's no reason to compromise if there's no good reason for doing it in the first place. I think Bill is sort of nipped on the ankle by his own argument when he says that all but about 16% of the money comes from the private sector, the government providing the 16%. Fine. Get some more from the public sector or slim down some of what public television does. The fact that there is Pentagon waste simply is not, Ted, an all-purpose argument for every interest that everyone has outside of defense policy. The fact is, you go down the list from Head Start to child immunization, to AIDS research, to the National Institute of Health, we can find other uses for $1.1 billion other than providing for a service that has lost both its technological and its financial argument.
To a certain extent, Bill, I get the impression that there is an argument that would go away here. That is, the fiscal side of this argument would go away if some conservatives in Congress only felt that more conservative points of view were given expression on public television.
Well, they seem to be making that case, although it always has been numb to me to hear the arguments that this is, quote, a liberal and politically liberal network. You know, every public television station on the average broadcasts 6,100 hours of television every year. And for a small group of people to pick a handful of programs they find objectionable by which to characterize the whole output of public broadcasting is a distortion of common sense as well as of actuality to me. You know, military bans and everything else are part of the democratic process, and the way to deal with this issue is to take it into a fair and open debate on the floor of the Senate, and instead of with guerrilla attacks late at night or in legislation and corridors where we can't make our case, because what's happening now is this small handful of conservative senators are holding us hostage to their political objections. I say bring it out. No, look, we are a flawed medium, just like commercial television. There are a lot of things we do I wish we didn't do. We have our excesses too, but on the whole, and by public support and by other means, we know that we're providing a service that people find important to them, valuable to them, and for which they're willing to put up funds. It's only about $1 a year per person in this country, plus what is matched from private contributions, foundations, corporations.
George, which programs do you think ultimately would go down, would go under, if there were not the kind of funding that public television now enjoys? For example, let's take Ken Burns' superb series on the Civil War, and to really get unfair with you, the series that he's now doing on baseball. Is that the kind of thing that would flourish anywhere else, or even find roots anywhere else?
I haven't the slightest idea, but let's find out. I'm not prescient, so I don't tend to anticipate the market of a complicated continental nation of 250 million people. It's perfectly capable of producing demand. Too often, Ted, the rationale for public television programming is we must provide it precisely because so few people want it. I happen to have written as warmly about Ken Burns' Civil War series as anyone in America, to help give a small help in launching it, and I'm a small participant in the baseball show. I'm all for this, but I do not think that we ought to prejudge the market in this way.
Well, how are you going to judge a market that is driven only by commercial forces? George, I don't understand how non-commercial, and there is a value to non-commercial broadcasting, to the arts and humanities. How are you going to decide that in advance?
What precisely, Bill? You've said several times tonight there's an inherent value to non-commercial. To one way of another sort of synonym for non-commercial is something that does not have a market demand behind it. What is the inherent value of that?
Well, we're not making cars here or widgets, and we're not producing soft drinks. We're talking about the arts, we're talking about humanities, we're talking about education, which is almost always not market-driven.
But, Bill, books are published in this country. They are the primary carriers of culture.
And we have libraries because chain books don't, chain stores don't provide what people need when they need it.
The books are produced. You're talking about the production of cultural goods. The books are produced by Simon & Schuster and Random House and Free Press and other for-profit entities.
May I jump in here just with a thought having to do, for example, with museums? Were it not for the kind of support that museums enjoy, not just from the private sector, but also from the governments, federal and municipal, they probably would go under because, from a commercial point of view, they wouldn't make it.
I think that's fair, and I think some cultural entities have to have subsidies. Whether they should be federal or state is an empirical and practical question. However, when we have had, I repeat the technological change, when we have an explosion that puts into the 60-some% of American households wired for cable, not 3 channels, not 4 channels, but 44 or 64 channels, the idea that it is still essential, an undiminished essentialness about this, one begins to think we are now up against yet another immortal government program.
I certainly don't make the case that it or a lot of other things that are funded by public policy are essential. I do say it is valuable, and that our society has made cultural decisions, societal decisions about that.
I stipulate that it's ornamental and that it's nice to have it. The question is, we don't have money for every nice idea.
Well, then let's, if Washington could put its fiscal house in order and make, as you have often called, George, rational decisions about how to allocate social goods, I would certainly join in that. In fact, I make the case myself within the confines of public broadcasting that the extent to which stations move closer and closer to commercial television, when we are showing old movies, when we're showing Laurence Welk or Laurence Welk reruns, we don't justify or deserve any priming from the federal pump. But you, George, you're a historian whom I admire, and you know what the history of commercial broadcasting has been since the Act of 1934. Commercial broadcasting has moved more and more toward the diminution of the very values that you constantly espouse in your columns, including talk. It's rare on public broadcasting, it's rare on commercial television to have this kind of opportunity to engage in discussion.
Exactly right.
You once wrote a column about let's talk about talk and the value of discourse that's not interrupted, or the verbal equivalent of mud wrestling, or constant getting to the point when the commercial interferes with it. There has to be, it seems to me, philosophically, I know there's a difference, that there needs to be an alternative to talk, to culture, to arts, to humanities that are motivated solely by market forces.
You have my preferences down pat. You simply don't have the sequitur here that can go from my preferences to justifying the subsidizing of my preferences.
And that's a political discussion that needs to be held out there and voted on. I don't know how else to do it.
Gentlemen, we are out of time. We'll take a look at the overnight ratings tomorrow, and if you don't take us into the tank, maybe we'll do this again.
Look at the repeats.
What an interesting idea.
Look at the repeats.
Thank you both. George Will, Bill Moyers. I'll be back in a moment.
Point of fact, it takes the average person an average of 20 keystrokes to do an average task with their PC. Counterpoint. You can do it with just a point and click with Microsoft Windows.
If you're using a credit card to get a cash advance, you're probably getting soaked because ordinary cards charge you interest right from day one, which is why you should use the Discover card. Just pay your full monthly balance and a small transaction fee, and we'll give you cash, interest-free. So you can avoid taking a bath. It pays to Discover.
We Americans have some very particular ideas of what we want in our cars and trucks.
I feel like the car's like wrapped around.
One company gets input from customers at every stage of new product development to find out exactly what they're looking for. That may be why 5 of the top 10 selling vehicles in America are built by the same company, Ford Motor Company.
With your help, our quality gets better all the time.
Ford Motor Company. Quality is job one. It's working. It's working.
I just can't stand this anymore. How am I supposed to fall asleep with this pain? I could take one of those nighttime pain relievers with a sleep ingredient. But all I really need is Advil to help stop the pain that's keeping me up. Just Advil. That's all I want. Without the extra sleep ingredient I don't want. Advil is so effective, it relieves the pain, so I can get to sleep.
Discover the relief of Advil at bedtime. Advil, advanced medicine for pain.
Microsoft Excel can take any spreadsheet figure and easily turn it into a beautiful fact. All you do is point and click. Microsoft Excel, the spreadsheet for Windows.
Say good morning to Gloucester, to a fisherman's life and the coastal rhythms. Wednesday on Good Morning America.
And that's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been Nightline. If you wish a videocassette version of Nightline, the cost is $14.98, plus $3.95 shipping and handling. If you wish a printed transcript of this or any Nightline broadcast, please send $4 to Journal Graphics, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203.
Nightline is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
Wednesday, it's an all-star musical event.
I was a teenager then. It had a big impact on me.
Featuring the legends of yesterday.
It was fun to watch them dance and hear the tune.
And the superstars of today.
We all felt like one big community. It was just a lot of fun.
Join your host, Dick Clark, for American Bandstand's 40th anniversary special, Wednesday.
Clear and cool overnight with a low in the 40s.
Hello, my name is Richard Reeves, and I'm the director of the Investment Update programs. Most of the time, the investment advice we bring you is based on economic changes in the economy or financial circumstances that project a real opportunity. Once again, we're bringing you a great opportunity, but a major factor in this wealth builder involves the hardships and perhaps suffering of millions of Russians. None of us want our profit opportunities to increase another's hardship. So I've come to assure you that this wealth builder meets those strict guidelines. Even though this wealth builder may be somewhat controversial, I encourage you to watch the show and make up your own mind. Our host, Jack Kelly, will explain today's opportunity in just a moment. Stay tuned.
The economic chaos and severe food shortages in Russia give you, the viewer,
an unparalleled opportunity to learn how you can make $100,000 profit in the next few months. You're going to learn how to take the news that swirls in the world around you and turn it into a key that could unlock a vast treasure chest of wealth. This is one show you're not going to want to miss, because this is perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So stay tuned. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Jack Kelly, and welcome to the Investment Update. You know, the Russian economy is falling apart. People are on the verge of starvation. The world is rushing enormous amounts of food and aid to the Commonwealth of States, where I always knew it was Russia. Now, these facts have set up an unparalleled, unexpected opportunity to build significant wealth over a relatively short period of time. Today, we're going to simply explain to you all about this exciting opportunity to learn how to build your wealth. The Investment Update specializes in showing you how to profit from worldwide events. Folks, I'm proud and happy that you invited me and the Investment Update back into your homes with this very, very unusual